Hi, everybody. So, this week there's a tag going around called The Edge of Reading, and it's asking questions about the act of reading and interpretation. Now, some of y'all haven't studied semiotics, and it shows, so I'm going to put my university BS hat on, and you're going to have to indulge me a little bit because I'm going to touch a little bit on language theory. And, 25 grand in student loan debt later, which I barely managed to pay off. So this is probably one of very few times I'm ever going to be able to get to use this stuff, and I'm going to torture you with it. Okay. And a lot of this, by the way, is garbled by decades since I studied it, plus many, many murdered brain cells in between. So, okay. Give me your own definition of reading, or use mine. Reading is the act of interpretation of symbols that systematically put together in a certain sequence allow the reader to extract meaning from them in an active form of creation that can develop into complex narratives. I think that's fair. I think that I'm going to say right off the bat, reading is an understanding of the interpretation of a sign. Okay. Semiotics is the study of signs. Now, what a sign is the combination of the signifier and the signified. It took me 3 years and a lot of fucking money to understand this. The sign, okay, so the signifier is we can call it a symbol, we can call it a text, it's the thing that we are looking at that holds the meaning of the thing that we're understanding. And it isn't necessarily it can be a picture, it can be a text, it can be a word, it can be a symbol, right? The sign that we're looking at is what we're understanding contains both the thing we're looking at and our understanding of the thing. So, for example, if I say the word cat, right? Most people understand cat to be, it's a four-legged furry creature. It purrs, it meows, it's got murder mittens, and so on. So these symbols, of course, are words. So these signs are words that systematically put together in a certain sequence, sentences, paragraphs, chapters, story, book. Allow the reader to extract meaning from them, which is interpretation of the signifier plus signified, in an active form of creation. Yes, what we understand in our heads is, how we relate to the story, that can develop into complex narratives. Okay, now, in the next question, are reading and interpretation the same thing? If not, in what do they differ? I think where reading a text as a sign or collection of signs in order to understand information is a different thing from a narrative, which is this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and this is the result. Which is actually, in my personal, interpretation of these things, different from a story. For me, a story basically has to have 2 or more characters interacting, has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there has to be a conflict of some kind. That, to me, is a story. It may not be everyone's interpretation, it may not be everyone's understanding of how stories work, but it's mine. And so there are ways of reading and understanding a text that I think are not the same as reading a story. And interpretation, I think, is literally the understanding of the sign, right? Your acceptance, knowledge of what that is supposed to mean. So again, if I show you the word cat, right, you've read the word cat, but how you interpret the word cat is going to have a personal meaning as well. I mean, your idea of a cat might be different from my idea of a cat. And I mean, it could be completely different. It could be the big machine cat too, right? Not necessarily the furry thing. And that's, in that way, there usually does need to be context. The cat needs to be put into a place where we understand, why do we need to know about this cat, right? And I think also the word reading does require a certain measure of literacy in that understanding of this system of symbols, whereas interpretation, there are things that we can interpret and understand meaning from that don't require an understanding of the abstract language at all. For example, a baby does not have symbolic language. A baby can't tell mom what's wrong. A baby just cries. But with time and experience, the mom usually can understand the difference in cries, right? This is a hungry cry, this is a wet cry, this is a distressed cry. And that's done without any language at all, right? Okay. Are there any practices that you consider reading, but that would fit that or other definitions of reading? Yeah, I think that, again, if we're going back to signifier, signified, the signifiers that we understand, that are texts that we can interpret, we can read, we can understand as functions, or, as the written form, the textual form, the pictographic form of the ideas that we're trying to convey. There are a number of ways to understand these things that aren't word after word after word after word, right? So reading a map, for example, understanding of basic symbology, like a stop sign. Most places, at least in English-speaking worlds, I'm not sure about other areas, but an octagonal red, that's a stop sign. You're supposed to stop. Traffic lights, and that's there's also reading music, for example. Music is the written down form of the notes that are on the various musical scales, right? But it still requires a level of literacy with that particular language in order to be able to interpret them. Like if you give me a piece of music and I know how to read that, I can play it on the piano or I can sight sing it or whatever. It's been a very long time since I studied music, so I've forgotten what most of those things mean. But, if I went back and practiced for a couple of weeks, I might be able to, pick out a little tune somewhere. I was never, I don't have any real musical ability. I took a couple of years of guitar lessons, sucked. I took 4 years of high school music, sucked. But I did learn how to read music at the time. It was a very long time ago, though. Anyway, so the ability to read music is an example of that. Or even just understanding those signs, they're a function of a certain level of literacy. And I think that these questions, we're kind of getting back and forth on what is literacy or how we're processing language as human beings, right? And that's where kind of language theory comes in, the ability to talk about these things, the ability to interpret these things, and at least to have names for these questions, right? It's not something that is universally set in stone, but studying language theory you can kind of go to, well, so and so said this and so said this, but like I said, this was many many years and substances ago. I don't remember. Roland Barthes was a big one. Saussure was a big one, and then a lot of the other ones are what we are using our understanding of language to do, whether it's turn out new people to feed into the machine, like Althusser. I always loved Althusser. He was an absolute nutcase. Or just to disgust ourselves, right? That's the carnivalism. That's another one that I loved. He was hilarious. the realm of fart jokes, but you can actually study them in a university setting. It was great. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Is there an ideal reading experience for you? What is it? Is there a book that represents it? This isn't anything in the context of, I don't know, maybe this is just a nice question in all of the abstract blah, 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 but I like, my favorite books are the ones that are sort of multi-generational, families, compelling characters. So books like Fall on Your Knees by Anne Marie MacDonald, The Cider House Rules by John Irving. My all-time favorite novel, and speaking of signs and symbols, that was a symbol that I'm going to respond to because that means I have to do something. Hang on. Pavlov would be proud. Anyway, my all-time favorite novel is The Diviners by Margaret Lawrence, and it's because of the characters, and also because it's probably one of the only works of fiction that I've read that's actually honest about poverty and the writing life. Yes! If there is such a thing as an ideal reading experience, it follows that there is a scale of value to reading. What is at the bottom? I don't devalue reading because I feel that it is such a wonderful privilege to be able to read, to be free to read. There are many people who have died for my ability to be able to read. Are there books that I wouldn't waste my time on? Oh yeah, because they're poorly written, I don't enjoy them. But you know what? I'm not going to knock anybody else who does enjoy them. Go ye forth. Be literate. We are lucky to live in a society that is literate, and that encourages us to be very literate. Is there a book on that bottom that you love or enjoyed as much as those on the top? This is a horror channel. I love horror, and the pulpier the better, and the more ridiculously over the top the better. There's a point where too much gore, I tend to, flip through channels. Erotica just really isn't my thing. I get bored. But other than that, yeah, I like trashy, pulpy stuff. I like Sidney Sheldon. I like Jackie Collins. I like, the sleazy stuff as much as I like literature. Probably more so because it's aimed at a more popular audience, and the plots and characters are a lot more fun. Is reading as the art of associating symbols and creating meaning out of them a predecessor of language, or does it come after as a consequence of those language? Yes, it is absolutely a form follows function. You absolutely have to have language in order to read, because the symbols themselves are collectively what we have agreed upon that they mean and what we teach each new generation that they mean. This is one of the reasons that different words actually, the meaning changes over time. And there's what we call connotative and denotative meaning. So, for example, I'm trying to think of, so the denotative meaning is the dictionary definition. This is what the word means. The connotative meaning is how it is used in general, parlance. So let's take the word sick. Sick, the denotative dictionary definition means unwell. But 25 years or so ago, it started to mean this is a good thing, right? I don't know why, it just became a thing. But understanding the connotative difference means that we have social interaction, we have understanding, we have the communication that we have taught to each other, and we understand that this means a good thing, not a bad thing. And that is a requirement of language. I mean, we develop language in order to communicate our thoughts and feelings to one another. We are social creatures. This is why we develop language. And the reading part of it, we cannot develop unless we have social interaction and we have language there. This is why a feral child cannot read, and a feral child is going to understand it's going to have different symbols for things. I mean, just as one example, different signs for things, right? Where was I going with that? Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. Okay, is everything that can be read or with meaning a language? I think so. I mean, I'm not quite sure what the question is. I mean, a sign itself is part of language, and it's part of a broader understanding of how we communicate with each other. On its own, a sign doesn't have meaning without language, I think, and vice versa. I mean, we have the concept of something like a cat before we ever understood it. I mean, before we ever called it a cat. That was the furry thing with claws. That we understood, stay away from it or it's going to claw your eyes out. But we didn't call it a cat until we collectively said, okay, that's what that is. Is everything that can be read or with meaning a language? I don't understand the question. I'm just going to leave it at that. Mention a few languages that define the conventional conception of what a language is. Could a book be written in any of those languages? The only thing I can think of for this question is just computer coding. And again, a language is a system of signs being the container of signifier and signified. And in order to communicate something to an audience, and communication again requires, a message, a medium, a sender, a message, a medium, and a recipient. And I mean, a computer language is still, your sender is the programmer, the message is whatever you're trying to tell the computer, the medium is the computer and the language itself, and then the recipient is the computer that understands, interprets, and responds. Could a book be written in any of those languages? Well, lots of books have been written in computer code. They might not be something that anybody that doesn't understand computer code would be able to read or interpret or respond to, but they exist. Defy the conventional conception of what a language is. I don't think they're... I mean, beyond what what the conventional conception of what a language is, I don't quite understand what that is. Or are we talking about, language requires words, whereas conveying meaning, can you convey meaning without language? Yes, I think you absolutely can. I previously used the example of a baby crying, and there is still meaning in those cries. And I might have a degree in communications, but pointing and grunting is always the easiest. Sometimes you can understand what I'm saying. If you could boundlessly read or understand the meaning in one of those languages, which one would it be and why? I would absolutely love to learn how to code. Beyond that, it would be interesting to learn how to read music again. It's a skill I've lost. Other than that, I mean, because I understand that language is the system, the series of signs and signifiers, it's all language to me. So I don't think that there is anything that defies a conventional conception of what a language is, because we have signs all around us that we have to learn how to interpret and how to understand. So I'm not 100% sure I've quite grasped the question there. So anyway, I hope that sheds a little bit of insight, at least on how I understand these questions and how I understand language and narrative and communication. It's kind of fun. It's always a little bit fun revisiting the old, dusting off the old brain cells that I've killed. So I hope you understood some of my blathering. And if you want to leave any comments or offer some insights of your own into these questions, I'll write them down in the doobly-doo. Hope you're reading lots of horror. Have a great day.